just being so frustrated by the wickedness that's being perpetrated uh, against the vulnerable, against children, the hatred of the church, the complete sphere of lies projected by the media, by governments, by academic institutions. The entire situation is becoming unbearable. I just want the Lord to come. However, we have a work to do in the meantime. But the way it's going, I'm just wondering how much longer will we have when we can do anything before that time comes when the hand of God closes the hatch of Noah's Ark once again, and there's no way to perpetuate the age of grace anymore because God has ended it. His spirit will not forever strive with man. I really believe we're coming to that. I just don't know how much longer we have, of course, but I think of our children and grandchildren, and it's very, very trying and frustrating. But I thank God we can believe the promises of Jesus. That's what kind of a week I've had, looking at the events of the week, the news events.
Thanks, Jacob. And we always appreciate you being transparent, Jacob. It's not like we have to take Prozac all the time and just kind of pretend to be happy. There are things that are really troublesome in the world. And Paul the Apostle talked about his struggles and how he just even desire at times not to be alive. He was completely even out of the desire to live anymore. But God held him. God who raises the dead was able to hold him up, and I think he's able to do that for us today as well.
Yeah.
Even our Lord Jesus struggled with that, right? Where he saw the wickedness and he wished the fire was already kindled, and then what he was going to go suffer for us. We'll talk about that in a moment. So thank you, Jacob. So blessed to have you here. David Lister from down south. How are you, David?
I'm all right. A beautiful day in Dover. The rain's passed and the sun is shining, so it's good to be here. And
raining
like
and
Jacob,
sunshine.
Yep, it's not bad. And like Jacob, it's been a tough week. And just on a personal note, I've met some pastors in the last few weeks, and they're teaching milk, and no wonder the church is in trouble. I mean, they're teaching milk and they don't even know it, so it's kind of depressing. You would think people that are standing in the pulpit should know how to teach meat.
Yeah, and actually the writer of Hebrews lament over that in chapter 5 that they have progressed so long, but they couldn't even get the milk. They couldn't even get the meat. They were still in milk, and they were still babies, undiscerning. Actually, call them undiscerning.
Yeah.
Very good. So blessed to have you, brother. And of course, from even more southern, Davey from Australia. How are you, Davey?
Doing pretty good, thanks, brother. Good to be.
Right, welcome to that. Yeah, blessed to have you here, brother. And hope things are going well down in Daniel Andrews country there.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Just on the lighter side. Jay from Hollywood, North Hollywood in this case. How are you, Jay?
I'm doing well, Marco. Good to see you. Happy Good Friday.
Yeah.
Hope everything's great.
Blessed to have you here, brother, and blessed to have all those who are watching live and those who are watching later. It is, as Jay said, it is Good Friday, as it were, God's Friday. We'll talk about that in a moment. And we want to welcome those who are watching and all of our platforms, Memorial.tv, Rumble, Vimeo, Telegram. As you know, we're also live streaming too on Newbie Alert channel on YouTube. So if you get hold of that, in fact, I'm going to ask you guys, either Davey or Jay, if you guys can put it on the actual chat on Rumble, so people can be aware of that channel. More videos will be going up on that channel as well, and as well as the Skeptical Partisan. And actually, we have a video that they let us use it. So they're nice guys over there, Skeptical Partisan, right, Jay?
Absolutely, very, very nice people over at Skeptical Partisan.
Yeah. So thank you for letting us use it, and of course. We'll let Jay tell you more about that channel another time, but it's very good. Go there, and it's quite a bit of good stuff. Dave Moriel Jacob approved, I guess you could call it that, right? So you can go there. Amen. Well, before we get started, just a few announcements. We'll start with Jacob, and then we'll go to David very quickly. on announcements, just to get some of the announcements out of the way before we move into other topics. Go ahead, Jacob.
Well, dear friends, you know the age in which we live. The media is controlled, it's corrupt, it's there to manipulate opinion. It's not there to present facts for analysis. It's there to tell you what to believe and what to do. It's not there to present you the situations for what they are in an honest manner so you can make up your own mind. But there's an increasing bias. We see it as a bias against Israel. We see it as a bias against traditional values. We see it as certainly a bias against biblical Christianity. And we have been forced some time ago to make the decision to put ourselves as far as we can outside of the control of social media, outside of the control of YouTube in particular. We have Moriel.tv, MorielTV.org, which is also accessible directly through the Moriel.org website. So there's Moriel.tv, MorielTV.org. We also are to be found on Rumble. We are also to be found on RTN. We also have other partnership channels, including Grain Store. And we are on a variety of other smaller platforms, such as BuzzFeed and I think Vimeo. But the main ones would be MorielTV.org and Moriel.tv. Please don't watch us on YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube right now, please shift over to Rumble, shift over to Moriel.tv, shift over to an alternative platform, but don't watch us on YouTube anymore. We only use YouTube to direct traffic to our own platforms where we have our own servers where they can't close us down or censor us or monitor us or anything. Stop watching right this moment and go to Rumble or go to Moriel.tv. Thank you. Marco.
I just wanted to encourage everybody also with Rumble, please follow us on Rumble. We see that you're watching us, but our followers are not following the number of views we're getting. So please be sure to hit that follow button on Rumble and get notifications anytime we post something.
Yes.
Of course, that's the place where we take our questions. So it actually behooves you to go to Rumble as well to make sure you can ask the questions that we're going to ask Jacob at the end on Backstage, and we're on Backstage there. David Lister, any announcements before we get started?
Yeah, Mia and I are soon to be on our second fellowship drive, to be starting on the 17th of April here. And we're going to be going up through the north, up towards Pittsburgh, across to Baltimore, down through Virginia, and then back to Bristol and Knoxville and back to Nashville. So it's going to be a good tour. I really enjoyed the first tour, as Mia did. We really have seen some fruit out of this, that people that are in the same area found that there were people they didn't know close by. And so we're encouraging people to get together with one another and try to do functions. And we're seeing a couple groups already have sprung out of this. And so there, of course, Hebrews tells us that we're not to forsake our gathering ourselves to gather together, especially as we see the day of the Lord approach. And so it was just a great time. Like I said, we have a list that is sent out to you via Constant Contact. It will tell you when and where and the addresses. And so we're at hotels. And if you do get to the hotel, if you haven't contacted us by email, you can contact us and ask for me at the desk. And they'll put you in contact with me. We'll show you what room we're in. All right.
We're going to have a medicine show. So tell us the whole crew who's going to be traveling with you and Mia. Who's going to be
Well,
joining you?
Okay, well, not just us, but we're Mia's son is going to be, he's looking forward to this. He's a young man, he's a teenager, and we're going to have a special guest. He's right down there. And Jacob's going to join us after the 25th. So he will start, his first visit will be in Philadelphia in King of Prussia. And he will go down through the rest of places there with us. So please come and join us. So
There'll be 4 or 5 of us traveling around, encouraging people to build house groups, to build the germ cells, plant the initial seeds of hopefully house churches. So
yeah,
many Christians are without any fellowship, without any good Bible teaching, without any scriptural evangelism. Just no good churches or no churches. We really need to seek the Lord about building up an underground church while we still have time to do so. So if you can make it, visit our website, see where we're going to be. I look forward to working with David, with Mia, with her son, and we'll be joined at different locations along the way by more team members from the different branches. So we'll see you then. Eric will be with us in Pennsylvania. I think Dave Rosetto and Jerry DiMatteo will be with us in Baltimore. Yeah, so there'll be a gang of us, but we hope you can join our gang.
Yeah.
Praise God. Well, thank you guys so much. And, clarifying a lot of things. People have just different kinds of questions about, where you're going to be at and who's going and stuff like that. So thank you so much. And that should be a lot of fun. So God bless you guys up in the Northeast. It's actually pretty nice right now. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone, as you're watching, you also can listen on podcasts. We have a tremendous amount of information and studies and really good episodes and really good newer shows like Ken's Corner on our podcast. So not only you find Jacob's teaching, Sandy's teaching, evangelism, apologetics, Bible teaching. I think I'm on there too as well. And we also have Ken's Corner, which is a mixture of not only current events, but also some new apostolic reformation stuff. And they're making quite a bit of headways, not only in the States, but in Israel. So, and Jay, you participate in that. So that's a really good podcast. So I invite you guys to come out and listen to those. I think it comes out every Tuesday. So we want to gain some momentum there and make sure that you guys listen to that. Before we get started, just wanted to make sure you guys are on catching up, and then we'll go to backstage. Start getting in your questions early so we can get those questions into Jacob and David as we finish on backstage. Well, let's get started. I think the most important subject that we can talk about today is what this weekend is this week's been. It is Passover week. It is the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the Jewish calendar. And we're heading over to First Fruits, we would call the Resurrection Sunday. We get this question a lot. How does Jacob Prash and family celebrate Passover and the Feast of First Weeks as Jewish believers in Jesus, your family, Jacob? How do you guys celebrate? How do you see it? It's perhaps slightly different than in a westernized Christian mentality, but how do you do it?
Well, having had the misfortune of growing up Roman Catholic due to the influence primarily of my mother, even my father went along with it, even though he didn't really believe it. I had the whole Roman Catholic agenda forced down my throat. But later on, after I became a saved Christian, I realized that Jesus did not die on Good Friday, nor did he rise from the dead on Easter Sunday. Those things came from the Quadrigesimian Schism after the Council of Nicaea, and it was by the solar calendar, not by the lunar calendar, when Passover was. So Passover and Easter can converge somewhat or overlap somewhat, but they're not exactly the same. This year, they converge somewhat. Jesus died, again, not Good Friday, but he died Erev Hag, the night of the feast of Passover, the night before the first day of Passover. He rose from the dead on Yom Rishon of Hag Matzot, the first day of the week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It was not Easter. Easter had been a pagan holiday. So my family being Israeli, my wife, my children being Israeli, we celebrated the Seder like all Jewish families. We had the Seder, but then we did something unique that we didn't do otherwise. It was the one time a year where we would take the Lord's Supper together as a family. In the context of the Paschal meal, in the context of the Seder, bearing in mind that the Last Supper was a Seder. Now, this year, my wife is looking after an aging aunt who's from the Holocaust generation, one of the last survivors. And Pavi is away in France having to look after this aged relative at the moment. So I didn't have Pavi with me on Passover this particular year, but normally that's how we would have celebrated. We would have had a Seder meal and taken the Lord's Supper during the Seder. We would have stuck to what Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and 1 Corinthians said. He died on Passover and rose from the dead the first day of the week of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But that is not to criticize those who celebrate Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Just, it is a historical fact and a scriptural fact. That's not when it happened.
Thank you, Jacob. David, being here in America, it's a very popular, I guess you could say, holiday because of the Easter week holidays and all those things. But as a Christian, what has it meant to you, and how do you celebrate Passover, resurrection, Jesus dying on the cross for us and rising again?
Well, for me, for a lot of part of my walk with the Lord, and more so after coming to Moriel, is I did get the chance to lead a lot of Seders. They were events. We used them as outreach, which were really great. I even had some Jewish people come. One of my bosses came because that was Jewish, not well practicing, but she was glad because she could tell her parents she went to a Seder. I don't think she told them it was a Messianic Seder, but she got off the hook with her parents. So they were always great. There were evangelism outreaches, as we could explain the all of the symbols and everything. And so those were always good. But the last few years, with my mom and my dad sick and taking care of them, it's been a bit different with this move, as I'm a little bit more isolated, but not so much anymore. But I'll tell you what this season means for me. These fellowship drives have been wonderful. It's like almost like a resurrection in itself, going and visiting people and seeing them and understanding how hungry they are for the gospel, how hungry they are for fellowship. So that's been something that this season I've thought about, that these fellowship drives have been a boost to me and morale, especially after we discuss the things that we do here on Catching Up. So
Yeah, thanks, David. Praise the Lord. And of course, the resurrection, it's the crux of the matter, isn't it? It is what that Christianity hinges on that day. In fact, even the Bible itself described that if we didn't have the resurrection, then Christianity is a sham, is a scam. It shouldn't be followed. But the reality of it is, there is historical, biblical, archaeological, all whatever you want to call it about the Bible, it's there. But the resurrection of Jesus, the quintessential event of our faith, it is proven. It is proven that Jesus did rise from the dead. Is what the early church preached. It's what the early church preached in all the world. Is what we ought to keep preaching, because without the resurrection, we're still in our sins, and we might as well be here. But if the resurrection is true, then it's the greatest event, and it's the greatest time for believers to know that, because he rose from the dead, will also rise from the dead and be with him forever and ever. And that's the hope of every Christian that has loved Jesus and knows the resurrection power. It is the resurrection is what changes lives. The disciples were never the same. Paul the apostle was never the same after they encountered the resurrected Jesus. And I'm sure you guys have never been the same since you encountered the resurrected Jesus in your own personal life. Praise the Lord.
You speak of evidence, Marco. One of the greatest Jewish lawyers that didn't like Christianity, Simon Greenleaf, wrote the book, the foremost book on what is evidence. And Christian students challenged him to disprove the resurrection, and then Christianity would be finished by the rules of evidence. Well, he took that task in hand, and at the end of his investigation and all of his reading and all of his study, He came to understand that Jesus Christ is the Messiah of the Jews, and he must put his faith in him. Simon Greenleaf, he wrote a book, The Testimony of the Evangelist. It's a good book on what is evidence and how to use it in your apologetics, in your evangelism of other people, including Jews.
That's right. That's right. Praise the Lord for that. All right, let's get started with some of the probably the most difficult subjects to talk about is what's going on in the world. And we want to address certain things, and we don't have time to do all of them. It'll be quite a show to do all of them, but it will take a while. But I would say this, Jacob, let's start with this. The boldest election interference ever attempted, in my opinion. The indictment of Donald Trump, 34 charges, I believe, 130 some years. I don't even know. Alvin Bragg drags him into court in New York, and it just creates a huge fiasco. Some people say it's a distraction. We'll talk about that in a moment, but nonetheless, it is what we would say. It started to happen already, but it's a big moment where you have a former president being indicted out of the misdemeanor, if you want to call it that. But nonetheless, it is an attempt to try to go after Trump, after his whoever it is that would follow him and vote for him. And we see it starting in New York. There's 3 other cases that can lead to this. It could lead to Georgia. There's the election charges in Georgia. I think there's another one. There's a couple other ones after that. But these are the first one. This is the first one that the shoe dropped. What can we make of it? What do you think? And what can we make of it? And what can we expect? Some people say it's no big deal. It's just more political theater than anything else. But should we be concerned?
Well, we should be concerned, first of all, because of what we and certain others have been saying for some time. Democracy as we know it was something that definitely emerged from the Judeo-Christian influence of the scriptures on British and American democracy, parliamentary democracy in Britain, and presidential democracy in the United States. The founding fathers were not all Christians by any means, but they all adhered to Judeo-Christian principles of justice, government, representation, and rights of man coming from God, not from government or politicians. They all adhere to these things. Now that we've turned against God as societies, the democracy and the freedom it gave us is evaporating. And this is just another example of it. A corrupt, politicized judiciary, a corrupt, politicized Justice Department, a political fascist FBI, a political Gestapo, something that ideally should be abolished and replaced, and removed from the deep state. Be that as it may, it is a politically motivated prosecution by a prosecutor who is pro-crime. He has stated he will not prosecute misdemeanors. So he's legalized crime. Most crime are misdemeanors. He's a prosecutor who has basically legalized crime. This has happened in San Francisco and elsewhere, Los Angeles. But he's a pro-crime prosecutor who has legalized crime. He's not going to prosecute misdemeanors. Then he's reducing approximately 50% of felonies to misdemeanors. So he's taking felonies, calling them misdemeanors, and then says we don't prosecute misdemeanors. He's not only legalized crime, he's pro-crime, violent crime, letting dangerous criminals go. Now, this has taken place other places as well, where you have these Soros-funded prosecutors. It must be deliberate. But although he will not prosecute misdemeanors, he takes what, if true, would be a misdemeanor, on which the statute of limitations has expired, and contorts it with fanciful argumentation into being a felony to go after a former president. While the evidence to indict Hillary Clinton is solid, that woman should be criminally prosecuted. Or the evidence, for Hunter Biden, there's no question Hunter Biden should be criminally prosecuted. Or the perjury before the Congress that, Brennan and Clapper, those men should be indicted. Open cases that nobody would legally question are ignored. you contrive a prosecution against the next president to prevent him from being reelected, or at least trying to do so. Now, again, my preference for the White House at this point would not be Donald Trump. I would not support him again because of the pro-gay gala he did at Mar-a-Lago and certain other reasons. But nonetheless, he should not be prosecuted on something trumped up and contorted. It is a picture of what has happened to the judiciary. It's a picture of what has happened to democracy. And it reflects the fact that we're no longer in a democratic country in Britain or America. These countries are no longer democracies. Plainly, under Daniel Andrews in Australia, that's not democracy. Under Trudeau in Canada, that is not democracy. We cannot think of these countries as being democratic anymore, and that includes the United States. Now, there have been other people in the White House who have been enemies of democracy. Obviously, FDR being one of them, but nothing as overt and scandalous as this. This is what happens in the third world. Bragg is an evil, evil man. There are criminals on the street who can murder people that are on the street because of him. He's an evil, evil man. He's an evil person. He's pro-crime. He is a complete hypocrite, and I hope he's brought to account. He'll certainly be brought to account by the hand of God if he doesn't repent, which is unlikely. But that is what is happening. Politically, it may strengthen Donald Trump's hand. It may actually strengthen his hand. I don't know. But I'm not hopeful about anything anymore. Very, very briefly, nobody was more glad to see the end of Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland than I am. Now she's been replaced by a Muslim. Nobody, a Muslim First Minister of Scotland, and a buffoon at that. Chicago, nobody was more delighted to see the end of the lesbian mayor, Lightfoot, who was also pro-crime. And she was a racist. I was glad to see the end of her. Now she's been replaced by someone who was just as bad.
That word.
You know, the people in Chicago who voted, it's white liberals. Bernie Sanders went there, and black people who will vote for somebody just because they're black. They vote for their own death, their own destruction. It's going to be black children going to be shot dead on their way to school on the south side of Chicago. This is what the people who voted for her voted for. But they will reap what they sowed. I'm not hopeful about the next election. The last election, that the Republicans should have won the Senate and had a massive, massive majority in the House, failed to materialize. The only place what was expected materialized was in Florida with Governor Santos. The rest were narrow victories and small victories, and they actually lost seats in the Senate. And it was partially Donald Trump's fault. Not totally, but partially the fault of Donald Trump and also Mitch McConnell. I'm not very hopeful for the next presidential election. I will pray, I will vote. I hope God will intervene, but I no longer have any political, any aspirations of any kind of a respite coming through elections being won by people claiming to be conservative and certainly not Republicans. I really don't see a way forward. I'm looking increasingly to Isaiah 9:6. The government will be upon his shoulder. Until Jesus comes back, I have very, very little hope on any government. Even when Donald Trump was here and did many good things. Jared Kushner is a transhumanist. That was not good. He appointed Grenville, a homosexual, the ambassador of Germany, and he is fully accepting of the LGBTQ agenda. Not transgenderism, perhaps, but certainly the full normalization of homosexual marriage and things like this. He did not oppose any of those things, and had a pro-homosexual gala and Mar-a-Lago. I have no faith in Donald Trump whatsoever, but his prosecution is politically staged. It's a travesty. It's unjust. It's unethical. Bragg is a wicked man. on whom I pray the judgment of God comes swiftly. Nonetheless, this is the decline of democracy, and we brought it on ourselves by our rejection of this book.
David Lister, some say this is about not just going after Trump, but about anyone that opposes the left-wing party, the agenda, the establishment's agenda. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. Well, that'll be the last time I discuss my thoughts with Jacob on this, but I agree with everything he said. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, look, this prosecution shows that they're actually afraid that Trump could win again. They want to do everything they can to put a roadblock, such as a felony, on him so he can't run. But then that would still be kind of unprecedented territory, because he could keep appealing it, and as long as you have the appeal process, which to go to the Supreme Court, you wouldn't really be considered convicted. I think they would say he is, but they really are afraid of him. That shows you something about them. And it's also punishment for messing up their plans 4 years ago. Okay, so but this also shows us that they can come after anybody. Look, when you don't have men that know the difference between right and wrong, that are in law enforcement, such as the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, all these agencies, they're capable of doing anything to anybody at any time. And so that hope that our rights that the Constitution has given us are inalienable rights, such as the right of free speech, is in dangerous jeopardy right now. Our right to assemble peacefully is in danger, because they'll bring activists to destroy you, to kill you. These anti-protesters are openly saying they'll kill us, and more so the verbiage of Christians being the cause for all this. So they're coming for us. And so for us, I do agree that this is a threat to us. It's a threat to our liberty as Americans. But if America falls, the whole world falls behind them.
Yes.
But when people are this demented, they're capable of anything. Those that they're willing to pull the house down, and then the house falls on their own head. It's like that. And what's coming is going to be dangerous. But we need to be wise. We need to hold tight and stay close to Jesus to give us wisdom for these days that are coming. And so just be wise. Ask for wisdom. He gives it to you freely.
Yeah, we'll be talking about Christian persecution on Backstage. So let's save some of that for the Christian persecution at the end. So you don't want to miss Backstage today because of the topic that we're going to be talking about, is specifically what's spearheading the persecution.
Yes.
Jacob, real quick, David mentioned the FBI. And of course, there's been every pundit on MSNBC, CNN, they've all been down there this week, claiming that if we have any kind of criticism of the FBI, that's just going to lead to more violence from the right. There's going to be more threats from the right, from conservatives, from Christians. So even Peter Stork, is that his name? Stork, yeah. Strutz, that's right. The guy's demonized. I have absolutely no doubt about that. Comes on and he's began to lambaste anybody that opposes the FBI. They are going to be investigated, because what they're calling is for the violence, and you can't have violence against the FBI because they're such a pristine organization. Jacob, you've been critical of the FBI, not just of defunding them, but dealing with them and getting rid of them. Very quickly, the FBI, what's their role in this whole mayhem?
It has always been corrupt since the days of Hoover. It has always been corrupt with CONTOPRO and other things of this nature. But now the corruption has gone beyond anything that even Hoover could have imagined, as devious as he was. When the CIA was established, Hoover wanted to control it, and he fell out with Dulles, and there was a big fight in the federal government that led to a rivalry between the FBI and the CIA. Essentially, the FBI got control of counterintelligence, which was extended into counterterrorism and things of this nature. And thus, a law enforcement agency also became a national security agency. The FBI was never chartered to be a law enforcement agency. It was chartered primarily to be an investigative agency, the criminal investigative arm of the Justice Department. It has gone beyond its original concept and mandate and been allowed to evolve into something it was never initially intended to be. The responsibilities of counterintelligence belong in Homeland Security. Not that that doesn't need to be cleaned out either, but it doesn't belong in the hands of the Justice Department. It is basically a Gestapo, a political police force. It has never been that good of a law enforcement agency. It's never been that good. I know, like, New York City police detectives and things like this have told me that FBI are basically lawyers with badges. They don't have the street smarts. They don't have the experience of a detective in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. I had FBI agents tell me that when they serve in the New York field office, that was like another training school above Quantico. And when they were reassigned elsewhere in the country, the other agents in the other branches asked them what to do because they've been agents in the New York field office. The FBI has always been overrated as any kind of even a law enforcement agency or an investigative agency. It has always been overrated even there. But national security is something it has no business having any primary involvement in. None.
Yep.
Homeland Security and the FBI really, it's like elected officials built themselves a prison for all of their people. You have Department of Homeland Security through the Patriot Act that now can just, randomly listen to anybody they want to, as far as their phone calls, any type of communication. Right. And then you have the FBI, which can prosecute, like good prison guards, rattle people's cages if they get, out of line. So, me personally, I'm losing all what little faith I had in elections and democracy, because these are all brought to us by elected officials. The people we elect and put in charge over us, they've built us these cages for us.
Yes.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. The reality of it is it's becoming more politicized, and it's not really about law. It's not really about basic human rights, basic civil rights. It's really about which party you end up in, which party you support.
Yeah. If it was about law, Hillary Clinton would have been indicted. If it was about law, Hunter Biden would have been indicted and investigated for espionage on behalf of China. If it was about law, the law would be applied equitably. But the FBI is not a legitimate law enforcement agency, and it's not a legitimate national security agency. It is an illegitimate Gestapo. As Thomas Jefferson said, if the people do not enslave the government will enslave the people. Well, the government is enslaving the people because the people have not enslaved the government.
To Jacob's point, even further, if it was about law, the FBI would have told us what happened to Jeffrey Epstein while he was in our own prison system. If it was about law.
Yeah. Well,
what do you do when the FBI goes to a FISA court with what they know is forged documentation paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign? And why was there no indictments of the Hillary Clinton? Why were Podesta, these people, not criminally investigated? Why were there no indictments concerning this dossier that the FBI knew was false and presented to a FISA court? The FBI needs to be investigated. It's a corrupt organization, but it's irredeemably, unsalvageably corrupt. It needs to be completely abolished and replaced by a different agency that would be limited to function along the lines of the original mandate the FBI was supposed to have.
Well,
Yeah.
Jacob, you hit on the problem early on in what you were saying. You said they were no good at investigating. So,
You know-
so they're so blind they can't even see their own problems. But I mean,
Yeah,
No, they can't see it.
The
They can't see
FBI from the beginning under Hoover struggled. Their first famous case was their murder of Indians on reservations, and J. Edgar Hoover couldn't solve it. And that reservation, they had oil. Those Indians had oil, and so there was pressure. And so J. Edgar had to go from Oklahoma down to Texas to get Texas Rangers to go find out who was killing them. So they were incompetent from the beginning.
Oh, they were always incompetent.
Yeah. So, and then also, if you remember, Jacob, during our time with Carter, we were fighting the FBI had been spying on our generation,
Of
which
course.
they're not allowed to do. And so we actually got a law passed where the FBI and the CIA were not to be talking to each other. And
Right.
only the CIA was supposed to be looking overseas. The FBI was to be handling criminal cases,
That's right.
bank robberies, things like this. But somehow that after that law passed, now they've somehow been able to say, work with each other by saying, hey, we think this guy is spying over here. Can you check in on him and then give us the information? And so they've found an end run around our own laws.
This is a principle of government generally. When a government agency or department exceeds its mandate and begins doing things it is not chartered or established to do, it doesn't do those things very well, but also it fails at what it was mandated to do.
That's right.
And that's the FBI. That's the school system. The school system was founded to educate children. But if you go back to the philosophies of John Dewey that were incipient in the state school systems,
Yeah, that is very.
now
very
they
important.
become to indoctrinate children. Well, it was never the job of schools to indoctrinate children. It was to teach them how to think, not what to think. But now that they've gone to indoctrination, they fail at education. The public school systems in America, the state school systems, cannot educate anymore. They're incapable of it because they've done something they were never called to do, which is to indoctrinate. Well, the FBI is the same. It was to be an investigation organ of the Justice Department. It is not a very good one and never has been because it became something it was never intended to be, a political police department. J. Edgar Hoover would spy on his political enemies and build dossiers to preserve his own position. It's always been like that. It's never been any good. Never.
Hey, what do you guys think about Nancy Pelosi coming out and saying, well, now Trump is going to have to prove his innocence? And it was such a crazy idea because our justice system is not based on proving you're innocent. You're innocent until proven guilty. They have to demonstrate that you're guilty. He switches the whole thing to become, now you have to prove your innocence. I mean, what in the world? Where are we?
This is corpus juris. You're charged with a crime. You're therefore guilty until you can prove you're innocent.
Yeah.
Well, the first one to do this was that deranged woman, Hirono, from Hawaii. Yeah.
Hirono.
A woman has a right to be believed. A woman accuses you of rape because she's a woman. She has a right to be believed. You're guilty unless you can prove yourself innocent. That was her. That's what she basically said with the Gorsuch situation. Well, this obviously is contagious. Pelosi says the same thing. Yet there are people who will vote for him.
Yeah.
Today in America, having a heartbeat is probable cause to the justice system today. That's where we're at. If you have a thought outside of what they want to indoctrinate people with, well, no, here comes the IRS, here comes the FBI, and what Nancy Pelosi is basically saying here is that we need, if you're a conservative and against the agenda which I push, you need to prove your innocence. But if you're on my team, well, you should just accept that we're innocent until proven guilty. It's called double standard.
Yeah. See if you're a good.
Boy, but how can Hunter Biden not be indicted? How can
Yeah.
Hunter Biden not be indicted and Joe Biden not be impeached? How?
Friends in high places.
Yeah, and the media won't show anything. The media will not even.
No.
They're in
they brought up
collusion with them.
Yeah, Jay brought the Jeffrey Epstein. How come we don't know who Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficked those kids to? How come we don't know that? Even though there's a list, we know who some of them are, but we don't know the rest of them. But anyway,
The
we can
media
go on
is
for a minute.
the Pravda.
Gazelle
FBI,
is,
KGB.
and and Epstein's partner is sitting in jail, keeping her mouth shut, promised to keep it shut, and maybe she'll get out one day.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's switch gears real quick, because at the other end is this horrible storm that most people are not even looking at, because they're entertained by bread and circuses like Rome used to be, which is the economy and the death of the global economy. The banking crisis keeps getting worse globally. Now, we're just talking in the US here, 1.7 trillion unrealized loss looms as banks rapidly deplete deposits. The first week of the banking crisis, 98 billion were withdrawn. Second week, 126 billions were withdrawn. I mean, we're just talking in the billions here, not millions. Then again, there's 5 more banks that are in trouble now. The symptoms are ready to erupt. But that's in the US. We're talking globally as well. Jacob, we'll start with you. Are we going through, and visibly, if those who are watching, are we looking at a change in the global monetary policy as we know it? That's gone away, and we're looking at a different one now. Like, call it Brentwood 2, call it 1971 with Nixon, call it whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
I don't think most people know what's going on, but
Let's begin with the banks, and we'll look
absolutely.
let's look
Yeah,
at the
go ahead.
banks, and we'll look at the central banks. When you have a total misfit like Jamie Dimon at the helm of Morgan Stanley, a total misfit,
He's on that list, right, Jay? I think he's on that list. And yeah, okay, go ahead, Jacob. Go ahead.
he's a horrible man. But the banks have not been well managed. They were responsible for 2008. And it was the Clinton administration who pushed the whole subprime thing. And
He's on that list too.
and Bush went along with it. Okay. So, you got people running things who maybe ought to be sitting in jail in some cases, this is what you've got.
Maybe.
The Fed, yeah, the Fed is trying to protect. The Fed is trying to protect the big banks and letting the smaller banks be vulnerable to market forces. But Janet Yellen, who's another disaster maker, that woman, her career has been based on creating disasters, and now she's the Secretary of the Treasury after she messed up the Fed. We're only going to protect the big banks. She actually said that in essence. But now the big banks are facing massive withdrawals. Yes, there is a banking crisis, and be careful. If Deutsche Bank, Germany, if Deutsche Bank goes to the wall the way Credit Suisse did, duck for cover. I don't think the central banks will be able to do anything to stop runs on banks. Already, look at China. China, they won't give you your money out of the bank. You go ask and they won't give it to you. Don't think that won't happen in the Western world. They'll put restrictions on currency withdrawals. And people see this coming, and so they're taking their money out now because they know they cannot trust or believe the banks or the central banks or the Treasury Department. What is going to happen? Well, let me tell you, first of all, what is not going to happen. BRICS and the yuan is not going to happen. The Chinese RMB, the yuan, is not a freely traded and exchanged currency. The dollar is allowed to float relative to other currencies with day-to-day changes in exchange rates. The yuan is not. Its value is fixed by the Chinese Communist Party and its adjuncts in order to keep it artificially low to subsidize exports. That's the first thing. So it's not a freely traded floating currency. It cannot be the reserve currency. It just cannot be that. No matter what they're telling you, it's saber rattling. It's shaking the cage. It's trying to create upset for political reasons. But at the present moment, there is nothing going to displace the dollar or gold in the foreseeable future, at least not in the near future. Okay. The euro follows the dollar, not the yuan. And the euro is not in very good shape itself. So the British pound. So what will happen then? What will, if there's no alternative currency, not the euro, not the yuan, not the brick, not the this, what is the alternative? They will go into digital currencyization. They will digitalize currency.
That's right.
And it's something I've been warning about for some time. They will get exchange rate mechanisms between central banks. Once you see ERMs between central banks, it'll be very easy to have a de facto one world currency. For instance, if the European Central Bank, which is just the German Deutsche Bank with a new name, and the American Fed made a 1-for-1 transfer rate, $1 equals €1, okay, and they maintain that with interest rate manipulation, you would basically have a currency so strong that the pound and the yuan and the yen and everything else would have, and the Swiss franc would have to fall in on back of it. That would be this, you couldn't stop it. Now, if you digitalized it, then what? We don't take cash anymore.
Yeah.
A cashless is what's going to happen. Look at here's my wallet. What do I got in here? Well, I got a blank check, but you don't use checks much anymore. I got enough cash. I couldn't even fill the tank on my vehicle. I got 10, 20, I got 35 pounds. Okay. I rely on plastic.
Yeah. Which is digital.
Which is digital.
Yeah.
No problem. They can do it very, very easily. All of the ingredients are ready to be put into the batter. The instability will be capitalized on in order to go towards what will ultimately be a one world currency. We know that from Revelation 13. The question is, how fast will it happen?
Yeah, I was last week. I was reading the article. I think I talked to Davey about that in Australia. There, the implications is that there's going to be less cash circulating. Less banks are going to be giving out cash. In Europe, even Christine Lagarde, the ECB, the World Bank, she basically disclosed her plans for a digital euro. I mean, we know these are in the making. We have Fed now that's going to be piloted, actually being piloted right now, ready for July, a some kind of currency, whatever you want to call it, Fed coin or whatever, that is basically central bank in the U.S. So these things are in the horizon, in the near horizon, not just in the further end, in the near horizon. David Lister, how would it change? How would it change society? How would it change the way we navigate through this world?
Well, when money becomes zeros and ones, those in charge of the computer and the currency are in charge. We wouldn't really have a lot of control over our life, because they could then implement what you would spend your money on. They could control where you would spend your money at, and so that they could create a stability, because right away there's going to be instability, as they work out the kinks between countries, work out that, like if Jacob says this, the German Deutschmark becomes equal to the dollar. Well, everybody else has to then adjust to that, right, Jacob? And so,
well, yeah, it'll be the euro, not the Deutschmark. It'll be the euro.
Okay, the euro. Okay, so now everybody's got to adjust to that. So, but there's still going to be this need for everybody to have oil. There's going to be this need for everybody to still buy and sell, because I don't think the time that merchant Babylon has fallen. So there will be instability and insecurity pretty well everywhere. And so there'll be this time of adjustment that comes in. And I think it will create even more fear and anxiety among the nations.
Also, understand the other dimension that's very briefly related to this. Biden is trying to push this new plan to make only electric vehicles. Now, of course, he's using the pretense of global warming, which is a nonsense in itself, to foment and to advance this particular strategy that he's trying to force on the automotive industry and on drivers. Only 1% of drivers have electric vehicles, and they have a lot of complaints. Again, stupid people, greenies, think that electricity comes out of a wall. They don't realize that you're burning fossil fuels to generate that electricity. So it'll be natural gas, okay? It'll be natural gas, and it'll be coal. Oil is a very expensive way to generate electricity. You're talking about natural gas and coal. We'll have to produce 75% of that electricity. Smaller amounts will come from hydroelectric, nuclear, and so forth. Okay. So what does that mean for oil? Oil is not going to be as important as it was. So that's without fracking. So since Nixon defaulted on the dollar in the 70s, taking it off the gold standard, okay, the petrodollar replaced the gold-backed dollar. It was Saudi Arabians pricing oil in dollars and recycling their own sovereign wealth in dollars into investment funds that are dollar-based. Okay, that is what gave stability to the dollar in part once the gold was gone, other than the overall strength of the American economy and the promise of the corrupt government. Okay, but be that as it may now, Saudi Arabia is beginning to play footsies with BRAC.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is now making friends with Iran. So what happens to Saudi Arabia if we don't need your oil priced in dollars in order to give stability to the dollar anymore? It's not going to be based on oil. Your oil is not going to have the same kind of power in the economy it did. We're going to electric vehicles, and those electric vehicles are actually going to be fueled by other fossil fuels other than oil, natural gas, of which the United States is king. This whole energy thing is a scam in itself, but that's another.
Yeah, for sure.
But how far out is our electric vehicles being even a 10% part of our force? I mean, you're talking what, 10 years from now, 15?
Probably more than that. Probably more than that.
Yeah.
But what it is, it's they're posturing. They're posturing. Saudi Arabia's postures. We're going to get a little closer to Russia and China now, away from America. We are posturing. So the Americans counter posture. You know what I'm saying? Well, go ahead, but we're not going to need your oil so much. We're going to go to electric vehicles, and those are the electricity is going to be generated by our own resources, not yours. We've got coal, we've got natural gas. We don't need your oil. It's all posturing. It's political posturing.
And there's nothing behind it because they can't change the economy this quick, right?
They cannot change it this quick. It's posturing. The same as brick. Brick cannot happen that quick. It would be so expensive and take so long to switch the world currency reserve away from the dollar. It couldn't happen in 5 years. It couldn't happen in 10 years.
They all got a handful of nothing. They're talking poker game. Nobody's got any cards.
That's right.
Let me ask you guys this question. Texas introduced a bill for a state currency backed by gold.
Yeah.
This is, again, other states, Tennessee, Arizona, Florida, thinking of the same thing, meaning that
Yes,
Tennessee,
giving
yep.
giving the states a back gold currency to counteract against the central bank digital currency. What a mess that would be. But we'll start with Jacob. Jacob, what would the implications be? I'm assuming certain states that have good economies and less debt would be worth more than other states
yes.
that have a terrible economy and have terrible debt.
And let's not forget, those kinds of tenders were legal at one time.
Yeah, they got the southern states. Remember Civil War? They had the
Yeah.
southern, what do they call them? The Confederate money. Confederate
Yeah.
states had money.
Yes, but
Are we looking at something like that?
but banks were able to produce their own notes at one time,
Interesting.
Backed by gold. I mean,
backed by gold.
China bought 24 tons of gold just last month. They're buying gold, and a lot of the Russia's buying gold. So what's up their sleeve?
Yes, the same thing.
Let me ask you this about on the global scale. We talked a lot about the U.S. because that's the center hub, but places like France, which has had millions of people now protesting not only their pension reform, but the globalism within the country and the energy crisis that Macron created. This is big. I mean, they've been protesting for a while. They took over BlackRock's Paris's office this week. Are we going to see more countries like this just respond to just the people had enough of their central government and their central policies, monetary policies, and just basically create an internal revolution? These countries are in a very precarious position globally, economically, now domestically. It's not looking good for France, at least this country, France.
Italy not, because it already rebelled at the box office and elected a conservative. Fortunately, elected a sane conservative populist. But if Deutsche Bank goes, the economic fallout for the German economy is going to have political and social ramifications. Absolutely. And if Germany is shaken to its boots, it's going to have ripple effects, in fact, shockwaves for the other countries in Europe. Another one to watch is Holland. The present government of Holland is trying to destroy their own agricultural capacity.
Yeah,
literally. I mean, people are reacting in Holland. It's not just France. It just hasn't gotten as far in Holland as yet. So the answer to that is it depends on the country, and it depends on the internal economies of those countries. But bear in mind, again, I say it for the third time: if Deutsche Bank goes, look out.
So keep an eye on Deutsche Bank. That's a good point. We have some information on that coming up. But yeah, European nations are really struggling monetarily, and this idea now with Christine Lagarde about the ECB. I mean, they want to criminalize cash. It's not just outlawing cash, criminalizing it if you do have some. So it's a big push, and I can't imagine Europe just going down quietly. A lot of European countries may rise up, some of them may not, but as you said, I seen some protests in Belgium a couple of months ago. Just the same thing. It's the same thing. But obviously, Brussels.
France got
What's
a
that?
million people protesting just this past
France,
week.
Netherlands, Belgium. I mean, it just seems, not to mention, and we're not get into it tonight, but not to mention the war that seems to be looming in the horizon. Before we got on today, Finland got the news that Russia was moving missiles into to the border between Finland and Russia. So again, it's one of those things. You know, they signed up for NATO, and here comes the response of Russia. We're seeing this, and then that's one ingredient that would make this global economy just completely go haywire. The introduction of a major war in Eastern Europe. So, all right.
Can I ask a quick question, Jacob?
Yeah.
If you have all this turmoil, will natural resources be something that becomes bartered for stability?
When currencies fail, mineral resources, particularly precious metals, gain in value, and people become willing to trade in those things. But it will not only be gold and platinum and silver and copper, things like titanium. An environment can emerge when titanium will be better than cash. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Even water.
I was just about to say water. If you keep mining lithium and
Yep.
polluting the water sources with the basically the pollution from the mines, like some of these countries, the
Like
water
China.
supply will be absolutely devastated. And fresh water, very important for life.
What about on a state to state thing, trading minerals for minerals and things like that?
Absolutely. Well, that's already happened.
Yeah.
With the deal that that Britain under Thatcher made with the Saudi Arabians, it was $20 billion, which was probably like 50 billion in today's money. And the British were paid in oil. They were paid in oil, not cash. They were paid in oil.
Interesting.
$20 billion arms deal, and they were paid in oil. They took the payment in oil. These things have happened. They are not
new.
without precedent.
Yeah, no doubt. And we just want to remind everyone who's watching, thank you for watching us on different platforms. We'll be jumping over to out of YouTube and out of Facebook Live and into Backstage on our other platforms, of course, that are streaming right now, specifically Memorial.tv, Rumble, among the other ones. But on Rumble specifically, you get to ask the questions. So as we're getting close to the end of catching up, we'll take questions on Backstage, what takes place right after that. And so if you have your questions and send it in, we will be able to answer them. And we got so many of them last week. We're going to try to get through them all, but it was a lot of fun. Great questions. We thank you guys for watching and sending the questions. Let's pivot to Israel and what's going on there. Major stuff. Jacob, we're on the Passover week. We're getting closer to the Feast of First Fruits. We have this festival and joy within Israel because of the spring holidays. We get massive rocket barrage from Lebanon, from Gaza. Netanyahu convenes for a security cabinet with top IDF officials. IDF calls up Air Force reservists. Terror attacks. This is no small, it always happens type of story. When people see the news about the Middle East and they go, well, it always happens. IDF has been striking at the terrorist tunnels in Gaza because of what's going on there. There's been some raids and even at the Al-Aqsa Mosque because of what they're hiding within this mosque, especially Ramadan season right now. Now, the whole world's going up in arms because they say Israel's the aggressor. Jacob, clarify some of the smoke that's
Okay,
going
first of
on.
all, there's always the hidden finger of Iran pushing the buttons. The Al-Aqsa Brigade, which are crazy people, have a penchant for throwing not just debris, but projectiles. And now that we're using fireworks off of the Temple Mount down onto the Kotel, the Wailing Wall Plaza, That's what they've done this before. The Israelis send military police up there to stop this from happening. You're attacking Israel's, the holiest site in Judaism. You're attacking it from the Temple Mount. Knowing that the Western media will be sympathetic to the radical Islamists, they do this. The Israelis go up and the Al-Aqsa Brigade enclose themselves in the Mosque of Omar. No, I'm sorry, the Mosque of Al-Aqsa Mosque, where King Abdullah's grandfather was killed. Our great-grandfather was killed, for whom he is named. He was assassinated by the Mafdi's men who were wanting to make peace with Israel. You can still see the bullet holes in the pillar where they shot him. I've been in the place. And now they're in there, and they're with these fireworks, not firecrackers, but things like, I don't know, cherry bombs, things like this that you can throw and actually hurt somebody. Okay. So they're in there, and the Israeli military police go in, and they begin fighting, and they clean the joint out. This is seen as an invasion of one of Islam's holiest sites. So they begin firing missiles, coordination now between Lebanon and Gaza. It's a question, was it Hezbollah doing this in Lebanon, or was it some other faction? But the finger of Iran is plainly in play here, at least to some degree. So the Israelis respond. The Iron Dome system shot down most of the rockets. I talked to Moriel Israel today. I talked to our office in Jerusalem, and the son of one of our staff, he was on leave from the military, the Air Force, and he was called back from leave, back on emergency duty. He had to go back to his base. I can't reveal anymore, but I spoke to Elon, to the Moriel administrator. It lives in Galilee, and rockets fell close to his house yesterday. The rockets were falling around his house just yesterday. So again, it directly affects Moriel people. That's just the way that it is. But it is a coordinated effort. It was designed like the Yom Kippur War to happen at Passover. They provoke an Israeli response. When the Israelis are forced to respond, then they make themselves the victim. That's the way it is. It's the same demonic strategy you have with the transgender people. The transgender person goes into a school, murders some kids and teachers, and then they become the victims. We're marginalized. You're using this as an excuse to attack transgender people. The same thing. The aggressor becomes the victim when somebody responds to the aggression. This is the game. Yes, it's Iranian strategy. It was certainly Yasser Arafat's strategy. But I believe it's Satan's strategy.
That's right.
I believe there's a demonic power on back of this strategy where you provoke something and then make yourself the victim, knowing there was going to be a response.
So you have Hamas, you have Hezbollah, you have Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Who else is involved in this, Jacob, do you think?
The El Aqsa Brigade.
Alaska Brigade. All right. So these are major terrorist groups, and they're actually causing a lot of, especially Passover time, but they're using Ramadan and their holidays to
Yes.
sort of hide this. Yeah, sort of hide this. But they've always done Ramadan. Jacob, I think we've been here 2 or 3 times already, or twice, sorry. Ramadan always stirs up these strikes and these terror attacks. And then the IDF comes in and cleans out the place, and then they we're being harassed. Our worshipers are being harassed, but aren't Jews harassed all the time?
Yes, of course. Not only that, don't forget the Biden administration or the Joe Obama administration is no friend of Israel. No. It may be politically obliged to cooperate with Israel, but it is biased against Israel. It leans towards the Palestinian Arab Muslims. It does not lean towards Israel. And this was not only true of Biden. I think of George W. Bush. Again, he and Cheney. The Saudi Arabians had the Bush administration in their back pocket. They forced Israel. They pressured Israel out of Gaza without a peace treaty, without any guarantees. The Israelis no sooner left Gaza than Gaza was taken over by Hamas because Arafat was looting all the money and international aid that was given to help the people of Gaza. And then Hamas comes to power, and Gaza is used now as a launching platform to shoot Katyusha rockets against Israel. And that was courtesy of George Bush. So, Biden and Obama are enemies of Israel. George Bush was no friend of Israel. The Saudis had him in his, even after September 11th, he faced Mecca and licked the boots of Saudi Arabians. That was his primary response to September 11th, was to lick the boots of the people who funded Al-Qaeda and the September 11th attacks. And what George Bush did was kneel down in public and lick the boots, or the camel muck off the sandals of the Saudi Arabians. That's calling Islam a religion of peace and getting all the Saudi Arabians out of the country because the Saudi Arabians funded Al-Qaeda.
Yeah. Put a Quran in the White House, remember?
Put a Quran in the White House to honor Islam. in the name of the Quran, they bombed the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, killed thousands of Americans, and then you honor the religion that in whose name it was done. That was Bush. Well, that's Bush, that's Biden, that's Democrat, that's Republican. We have wicked leaders, and only God can make a difference. Trump was something of a difference. Trump was the only one who was really different.
Jacob, people make a big deal about the refugees, and they say Gaza is like a prison because there's a border between Gaza and Israel. But isn't there also a border with Egypt, and Egypt doesn't let them in? Our refugees from other Palestinian refugees are not allowed to go into other Muslim countries, even though they share the same faith. I mean, why don't these Muslim countries, Arab countries, take them in?
With Camp David, Menachem Begin offered Egypt Gaza, take it back. Egypt didn't want it.
Oh, man.
You had pogroms. You had pogroms in Syria against Palestinian Arabs. You had pogroms in Kuwait against Palestinian Arabs because the Palestinians backed Saddam Hussein. Then you had a civil war between the Palestinians. Now, the Palestinian Authority, Arafat's old power base,
PLO,
called Fatah in Arabic, fighting with Hamas. They hate each other. Their only common uniting thread is their common hatred of Israel. But these people hate each other. You look at what was done to the Palestinians in Kuwait, in Syria, in Lebanon, what they did to each other, and what they did to each other in Gaza. It's nothing like what the Israelis did in self-defense. This is what you're dealing with. The only way to unite these people is to have a common enemy. Remember, Ishmael's seed will always be divided, and Esau's sword will always be against his brother. As long as the curse of Islam plagues the Arab people, they will never be a people of peace.
The sword will never depart from his hand.
That's right.
That's right. They cannot be a people of, they can't even be at peace with themselves.
Jacob, you told me this story, and I want you to tell the story again. You were at in London, Speaker's Corner, and you witnessed to Muslims there, and you talked about the gospel to them, and you preached the gospel to them. Tell us that's incident that happened when you had, they went crazy, this riot, but you used that.
40 of them attacked me. 40 of them attacked me, and it was crazy.
But you used that very same thing about.
It was when Kuwait. It's when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, 1991, I think it was then, and I preached regularly on Sunday in Speaker's Corner, in London, which is a fiasco of a place. But anyway, I used to preach there every Sunday after church. I'd go with my stepladder, and I was down there, and the Muslims were always there, and they had a big problem now. And I began to say, well, I have two books here, Al-Quran and Al-Kitab. The Bible, Kitab is Bible in Arabic. I speak some Arabic. And I had the Quran. And which is right and which is true? The Quran says, Ummah, Muslims are one nation and one people. The Bible says, Ishmael's seed will always be divided, and Esau's sword will be against his brother. What's happening? How come? How come? I saw the king of Saudi Arabia on TV last night on the news. Help, America, save me. Help, Britain, save me. Help, Christians, save me from the jihad. Save me from my Arab Muslim brothers. Please, Christians, save me. They were going crazy. And they were, so I had a loud voice. It was a good for street preach because I had a loud voice. And I began to say in Arabic, Ala Nabi bi kifalak mabsut, alhamdulillah. Kuwaiti, ya Sadiqa, Iraqi. You're a Kuwaiti Arab Muslim. There's your Arab brother. He's from Iraq. I bet you his brother is raping your little sister right now. In fact, I bet his brother is raping your mother right now. You know why? Because the word of God is true and the Quran is a lie. You're not one people like the Quran says. There's no Ummah. You're a divided people like the word of God says. I just kept going like that. I just kept going on like that. And they were nuts. And then more of them came and they've been kicking the ladder and trying to shake it over. And so, I began to praise the Lord in Arabic. As this, all I could do was sing. I couldn't get a word in edgewise anymore. So I said, Yeshua HaMashiach Majdan, Hallelujah. Yeshua HaMashiach Majdan, Hallelujah. Ra'isusalam Majdan, Hallelujah. Ra'isusalam Majdan, Hallelujah. Yeshua Akbar, Yeshua HaMashiach, Muhammad La Akbar, Kitab Akbar, Quran La Akbar, La Akbar, Muhammad La Mubarak, Yeshua Mubarak. And when they heard when the Arabic, then they were
nuts.
The only reason they didn't want to kill me is because they were trying to figure out something worse to do. It was absolutely, the cops came, it was absolutely crazy. It was like a riot, but they couldn't handle it. They just couldn't handle it. I said, look, no two Christian democracies have ever had a war. When any two countries in the West had a war, one was not a democracy. But most jihads are Muslims fighting other Muslims, and they couldn't deny it. They can't handle the truth. So when you get these Muslims, their response when they can't answer rationally is to get violent.
Yeah.
Is to get violent. But you know, I see the same thing today with the pro-abortion activists, with the pro-same-sex or trans-sex activism. The left, I know because I was a radical socialist in my youth. It's like a religion, and if anybody disagrees with your political ideology, it becomes like heresy or apostasy or heresy or some kind of sacrilege or something like that, and you have to silence it because it's automatically lies. You can't interact with the truth and debate it. It's like religious fanaticism. Well, the same kind of religious fanaticism I saw among Muslims, I see in the modern left. It's a religion to these people. A demonic spirit gets control of it. It happens in Islam. It happens in the pro-death, the pro-abortion activism, and it happens in the pro-transgender activism. There's a demonic spirit on back of it, and it manifests itself in violence. They cannot respond to truth. And when you hit them with the truth, and the word of God is true, what they can't refute, then they become violent. And that's what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Jacob,
we'll be talking
real quick question about that.
Yeah,
how long ago was that?
91, he said.
Okay, 91. If you did that today, you would still be in prison.
Yep.
Yeah, Tony Blair
It
will
would have
come
probably killed you, Jacob, if you did it today. Because even the guy that came after you, he had the lead.
Jay Smith.
Yeah, well, they kicked the ladder over. There was like 40 of them trying to get me. Man, that was weird. But the Lord just protected me. I got hurt a little bit. I got banged up, but I was all right.
Incredible. We'll talk about that on backstage because that kind of.
You asked me about it, so I told you the story.
No, I know. Well, yeah. That's what I wanted you to say because it's leading to the next subject, which will be Christian persecution in the West and the same spirit in Islam. It's being now visible, the zeitgeist in the leftist, socialist, Marxist groups that are rising up. So we wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that we're going to backstage in a few minutes, and we're going to be heading to backstage to ask questions for Jacob and David, and we're going to tackle a very important subject. which is about Christian persecution. So join us there. We'll be signing off from YouTube. We'll be signing off from Facebook Live. And if you're already on Rumble, God bless you. If you're already on Memorial.tv, the Lord bless you. I would say even more. Thank you for watching it there, memorialtv.org. And make sure you guys get to, because backstage is going to be it's always good, pretty intense today. So we got some videos, we got some stuff we want to talk about. We got a video from the skeptical bipartisan skeptical, either way. And courtesy of them, the skeptical bipartisan will give us some really good videos. So come over there and watch us. So we'll be signing off from here. Thank you for watching Catching Up. We're going to backstage, which is the other section of Catching Up. And we'll see you guys in just a few minutes.